Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming this afternoon. As you know, we've been holding a series of consultations. We first started off with the teachers, and we went throughout Fiji and had the consultations. And we've again now decided to have a second round. Initially, we were going to have only nurses, but we've decided to extend it both to nurses and also any other civil servant that may want to know about the reforms. Sorry, it's time up the stairs. The way we run the sessions, actually, I'll just take you through a slide presentation and actually explain to you about the reforms itself. And then Jane Curran, who's the Director for Civil Service Reform Management Unit, will also take you through the job evaluation exercise and how that was carried out. And then we open up the floor for any questions that you may have. And then if we have time, I generally find a little bit of time to take you through very quickly through the budget. Because as you know that the civil service pay rise, etc., is also costing us another $145 million more. This is going to be, of course, a recurring expenditure now, henceforth, because of the pay rises. Some civil servants, of course, have got pay rises of up to about 80%. Some have 30%, some, of course, 15%, some slightly less than that also. But overall, that's the sort of breadth of the civil service reforms and the pay rise that have gone along with it. But of course, the other point is that now, going forward, once this reform is completed, and your base salaries are actually recalibrated to the new levels, you now have a great opportunity to have pay rises now on a lot more frequent basis, essentially on the performance management system that we're going to install, and that will be put in place. So also, it gives an opportunity for the high flyers within the civil service to be able to be recognized for that and to get even higher rises. So ability to move within the bands is now a lot more enhanced. So we go through the first slide. Why do we do the civil service reforms? But before that, everybody talks about the retirement age. Saying, why is the retirement age 55? The retirement age was 60 until the first coup in 1987, when Rambuka decided to change the retirement age from 60 to 55. He brought it down to 55. And then, of course, it continued at 55 until 2000 when Garase brought it back up to 60. And they, of course, had different reasons at that point in time. Many said that the reason why Rambuka actually brought down the retirement age to 55 was because he wanted a lot of civil servants, he wanted to get rid of them, perhaps because of ethnicity, whatever the case was. So he reduced the retirement age. Then Garase, of course, apparently he wanted to retain people. He did not want them to leave because of 55 retirement age, so he increased the retirement age to 60. Whatever the reasons were, I can tell you what was our reason. We reduced the retirement age to 55 from 60 in 2007, primarily because today 69.4% of the entire Fijian population is below the age of 40. So those of you over the age of 40, you're in the minority. People like me are in the minority. People below the age of 40 are in the majority. Nearly 70% of Fijians are below the age of 40. So in order for them to actually have a better career path and employment opportunities, this is why the retirement age was actually reduced to 55 within the civil service. The 55 retirement age was actually challenged by one of the unions. It went to the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the courts actually held that we could actually keep the retirement age at 55. Of course, the idea is that there are certain skill sets that are fairly scarce, and if you belong to that category after 55, you can actually get re-engagement after the age of 55 on a yearly basis. So for example, we don't have enough specialist doctors or certain areas in nurses or even things like foresters or mariners or whatever it is, or marine scientists. If there, for example, is a scarce skill set, it could then be renewed for another year, of course with succession planning being in tow. What are the objectives of the reform? Of course, is to improve working conditions, the salaries, the allowances, the terms and conditions, not just the base salary itself, but as you've seen recently, we've announced the meal allowance being increased from $9 to $20. A lot of people have said to us, well, why have you done $20? It's too much. I heard some unionists say, well, it's a good thing, but they should have asked us first. No, we will not ask anybody if you want to improve your terms and conditions, because we believe it's a good thing to do. $20 may be a lot of money in Tavua, if you're having a meal allowance being paid in Tavua, but $20 may not be that much money in Suva or Denrau, if you have to go there for work. So we actually erred on the side of, on the higher side. We decided to put it at $20. There are many other conditions, for example, a lot of allowances that people do get. For example, if you go to rural or deep rural areas, maritime areas, we're looking at how we can also improve those types of allowances, which at a very practical level is very, very important to recognize too. There also needs to be a certain level of transparency in the whole system. There have been so many times that people have said to me in the past, oh, that person got that promotion because they're Itoke, or that person got the promotion because they're Indo-Fijian, or that person got that promotion because they all went to the same high school together, or they came from the same province, or go to the same church, whatever it is. We need to ensure that we create, in order to create a professional civil service, we need to have transparent processes so all of you feel confident that whoever has got the promotion has actually got it on his or her merit. That's very, very critical to create a professional civil service. So the reforms is essential to ensure that we have transparent decision making, there's better supervision, better training. The other issue, of course, is important that, as you know, under the Constitution now, your contracts are with your permanent secretaries. You are no longer employed by the Public Service Commission. The PSC under the Constitution now, of course, does not appoint anybody except permanent secretaries. And your engagement is between you and the permanent secretary of that respective ministry. When that engagement is with that respective permanent secretary and that ministry, it's a continuing contract in the sense that, irrespective of the permanent secretary changing, your contract conditions remain the same. The other point, of course, is that we want to be able to attract good people and also retain them. We have very high levels of attrition. There are certain positions within the ministry of certain people within the ministry, when they spend a few years with us, they get good exposure, they leave because of the fact we no longer pay them good salaries. There are many other multilateral agencies that actually employ people. So we find a lot of our economists and other specialist areas, a lot of people actually leave for other employers. So we want to be an attractive employer to be able to attract the right people and actually to be able to retain them. Of course, we need to be able to be responsive to the public. A lot of people forget that as civil servants, actually, our clients are ordinary Fijian citizens. They are the people who actually we are supposed to serve. When I spoke to the group of teachers, I should take a step back. The Ministry of Education, head office, has a lot of complaints against it, in particular by the teachers, because they believe that they are not handled well by them, they don't necessarily have a transparent system. So what we've explained to the Ministry of Education head office, that your clients are the 10,000 odd teachers that you're actually employing. And you need to be able to look after your clients, because your clients are the teachers. If you don't look after your clients, then they won't look after our clients. Who are our clients? Our clients are the 220,000 odd students in Fiji, who these 10,000 teachers teach. We now give free education, all the way from early childhood education to year 13 and of course tertiary and etc. We need to ensure that those students are taught by the best teachers. And those teachers actually feel happy with the work environment. Because if they are not happy with the work environment, obviously they're not going to teach well. And if they don't teach well, we'll have a whole cadre of people, a whole group of young Fijians who actually won't be very good when they reach the workforce. So you have to look at the big picture. So civil service reforms is also about ensuring that we refocus on the ordinary members of the public that we're supposed to serve. So OMRS was introduced in January of 2016, Open Merit Recruitment System, and the OMRS has had its fair share of challenges also. Some ministries have grabbed it and have run with it and have done a really good job. Other ministries have been slow. For example, the Ministry of Education resisted it for 6 months. I cannot actually sometimes understand why would people not want to adopt a system that treats everybody equally. If you are going to have an OMRS system, which means Open Merit Recruitment System, then everybody should adopt it. But the OMRS, of course, means that it's there to ensure that we ensure only the knowledge, experience, skills and abilities required for the job are considered in the assessment. No other external factors. Whatever is required for the job, that's what you're supposed to consider. Now, we've also, for example, have brought about a number of changes for transparency's sake. In the panel, for example, when you have 3 people to select or do the interview, the persons who are coming for the interviews, you need to have at least one person from outside the ministry to ensure a particular form of independence. If the position that you're going to apply for is band J and above, then out of the 3 people in the panel, one should be from the ministry, one should be from outside the ministry, and the third person should be somebody completely from outside of government, to ensure that we have that level of independence and level of transparency that needs to be put in place. All the panelists must be trained and understand the principles. I would recommend to you that those of you who are within the civil service, you should also go for this training, because you can also sit on the panel yourself, because only people who are trained can actually sit on the panel. We had a situation a few months back where in the Ministry of Economy, one of the positions came up to me, and I discovered that one of the persons who actually sat on the panel was not actually trained, did not go through, rejected it. Because you need to have people who understand the OMRS system to be able to sit on the panel, to be able to assess the people based on the transparent principles that we do have. We of course have a procedure review which is up and running, which is the appeal system, and we'll probably go into that now. So for example, this group of wonderful ladies sitting in the front, they all apply for a particular position in the civil service, and this lady here feels aggrieved by it. She has a right of appeal. So she can appeal to the Public Service Commission. Why does she appeal to the Public Service Commission? Because the employer is the Permanent Secretary. And the Permanent Secretary is answerable to the Public Service Commission. So therefore, if the system has not followed the set procedure, and she feels or she believes that the procedure has not been followed and she's aggrieved, she can then appeal directly to the PSC. The PSC now has a permanent commissioner. His name is Laurie McGrath. He's an Australian. He's been in the Australian Civil Service, etc. Laurie McGrath is the permanent commissioner who actually then will hear the appeal. When I say hear the appeal, not verbal representation, it's a written submission. Now when she appeals, she does not have to tell anybody. She does not have to tell a supervisor, she does not have to tell a permanent secretary or anybody. She writes directly to the PSC. And Laurie McGrath will then assess her submission. He can carry out his investigations, etc. If he believes that what she has said is correct and the procedure has not been followed, he then has the ability to go back to the permanent secretary and say, go through the entire process again. He cannot say, employ her. He can say, go through the entire process again because it has not been fair. Nobody at any point in time will actually get to know that she's the one who actually appealed the process. Because the idea is that she does not get victimized. So that's the process for the appeals process. That's already up and running. So I've said all of that. The Commission reviews the file. The process returned to the Ministry to redo from the point where it contravenes the guideline. The Commissioner, like I said, has no constitutional authority to determine the merit or appoint an alternate person. They simply look at the procedure. If it has not been followed, go back, redo it. Okay? So if we go to the next one. Now, wherever jobs where the increase in salary is over 15%, it must be advertised. That's part of the process. Some of you had pay rise which is less than that. Those positions don't actually get advertised. The positions don't actually get advertised, sorry. Acting arrangements to be put in place to ensure disruption to service delivery. The contract and acting letters are issued by the Ministry, in particular for teachers and nurses. We were in Nassau this morning. Some nurses actually had some issues. So even after this, if you have some individual grievances where the Ministry may not have necessarily done the right thing, you can raise it with Jane and Bernadette after this. We'll also give you an email address that you can write directly to, where not everybody will get to see the email except 2 or 3 of us, and then they'll be able to address those issues that you may want to address. One of the issues, ladies and gentlemen, of course, is that, and we have to be frank about this, most of the ministries, the HR department is not run very well. They have not actually focused on HR development. In fact, this is the problem of the system itself. As you know, that we have not really specialized in many areas. So the HR department, somebody came through the administrative section and came along and they got a promotion and suddenly became the HR person. That's how most of the HR departments have been run in Fiji. And that is unfortunate. So what we're trying to do is try and get some form of specialization, get the right people to fit in with the right jobs and be paid accordingly. So HR is very weak. We also know that some of the ministries even the contracts. Even before these reforms came into place, already 70% of all civil servants were already on contracts in any case. But one of the things we did find is that many of the HR departments in some of the ministries, they should know exactly, they shouldn't have a list of everybody that's employed in the ministry. They should know exactly whose contract is expiring when. They should advertise at least 6 months beforehand, and then you would know at least 3 months whether you've got the job or not. That's the way the system is supposed to work. Some ministries are doing it well. Other ministries are doing it terribly. Some ministries are doing maybe halfway all right. That's one of the areas that we want to focus on to ensure that they are actually doing it right. In fact, this weekend, starting from Friday, there is a permanent secretary retreat. So all the permanent secretaries have been gathered there, the chairman of PSC will be there, and we're going to address them on Saturday morning to also again highlight these issues. So there are those fundamental issues that need to be addressed. But it does not take away from the fact that the reforms themselves are actually in a very, very good space, and we need to be able to address that. Of course, where there are advanced plans are being prepared and advertised, where there are a large number of positions like education and some of the health positions, they're currently working out the plan, and they'll be advertising in October for those positions. We've also said, as we've said publicly, that these areas like teachers and nurses, with the contracts that are being put in place, and I'll probably next the next slide, is it ready? Okay, can we go to that? The contracts. The regulations provide that contracts can go up to 5 years. Some people have got contracts for 3 years in contracts, some people have got contracts up to 5 years. But we've said for teachers and nurses, their contracts will be automatically renewed because they're a different category of employment, and also be very largely disruptive in terms of having to advertise every single position. But of course, that does not mean, for example, if a teacher position is advertised, say for example for a head teacher, any person can apply for the job. Traditionally it has been that, if I've been there for 10 years and I've been an assistant head teacher, then only I'm the one who can apply for the head teacher job. It's been very sort of, gradual approach. Similarly, at the moment, a lot of people think that, assuming taking these ladies as an example, they think that we can only apply for this position if I'm more senior in years than the other person. That's how a lot of people view the civil service. But no, there may be some people who may be senior, but they're spending half their time in the grog bowl. There may be others who may be coming to work really late, even though they're senior. So why should a person who's a high flyer, who maybe have a few years less experience in the civil service, apply for that position too, if they have the capacity and the capability to do the job? That's what OMRS does. Also similarly, when I talk about the salaries also, the way that the salary system does work is this. Once we've fixed up the base and we have the performance-based system, we need to be able to reward people based on their performance. When we started meeting with the trade unions last year, Rajeshwar Singh said to me, everybody was in the meeting there, he said, why don't you give everybody a 15% pay rise? Give all the civil service 15% pay rise across the board. And we said no. Because the reforms, I said, needs to be carried out not just in terms of the salary, but also the recognition of specialist areas, which is what we've done with the nurses. There are now positions with the nursing cadre, the specialized nursing positions, which was not recognized before. Similarly, by giving a 15% pay rise across the board to everybody, you are not differentiating people who actually may be doing better than others. The other third point was, I said you may be shortchanging your members, because there are some people who have actually got a 70% pay rise. Some of the people have actually got a 40% pay rise. So the old approach of a 15% pay rise across the board would have not benefited, would have actually, those people who got a higher pay rise would have lost out. So that's the old way. So well, okay, let's negotiate. So he may have agreed at 10%. I could have come across, okay, great, we're giving a 10% pay rise, less cost to us, but we have not actually evolved with the times. We have not actually recognized people who need to be paid a lot higher salaries. And that's what the system does. So again, up to 5-year contracts, there is a fallacy. Some people went around saying that if you actually got a contract employment, in other words, if you got a 3-year or 5-year contract, you won't be able to get bank loans. That's utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. Every single person that's employed in Fiji that is not a civil servant is on a contract. You go to the private sector, everybody has a contract. They all get loans. I worked in the private sector before this job. I had a loan and I was on a contract. I had a 3-year employment contract. So everybody gets contracts. Banks also give you loans for that. So don't think that you won't be able to get loans. There's some mischievous sort of statement being spread. Now, the other issue, of course, is that there's nothing to fear just because you got a contract. People say, oh, just because you got a contract, therefore people can terminate at any time. No, you can't. You're guided by the terms of the contract. You're also guided by the Employment Relations Act that also guides the relationship between you and your employer. You also have a disciplinary process guideline that's in place. So in other words, there needs to be natural justice. I simply cannot wake up as a permanent secretary one morning and say, I don't like the top that this lady is wearing, therefore I'm going to fire her. I can't do that. If there is going to be any process, it has to go through a particular set out guideline process, which is all about natural justice. And natural justice means that if, for example, there is an allegation put against me that I may not have done X, Y, Z, then I should be given a right of response. If I'm given a right of response, then there could be some form of a determination made. When the determination is made, then I need to be given the reasons as to why the determination was made, how the determination was arrived at. So that's all forms of natural justice. You then, of course, have the ability to also, if you're not happy with it, ability to take it to the Employment Relations Court. You can do that. If you're not happy with the decision of the Employment Relations Court, you can also go to the High Court. So all those avenues are actually there. So it does not mean just because you have a contract of employment that you therefore have a, some form of imbalance in terms of the relationship. Now, the employment contract also confirms the fundamental shift in remuneration. You see what it means, the contract actually has the specific salary you're going to get now. So that protects you. It protects the employer too. So nobody can play around with the amount of, the money that's supposed to be paid to you. To those of you who have not signed a contract, there is no pressure on you to sign the contract. If you don't want to sign the contract, that's fine. Your salary will remain the same because you have not signed the contract. Because that's the term and condition on which you currently are. So, you may not sign the contract, you don't have to sign the contract, but then the salary continues the way it is. But of course then, it also means that the salary that you continue to get must be commensurate with the responsibilities that you're going to have. So let me give you an example. If hypothetically, for example you are a senior administrative officer at the moment, and the salary for senior administrative officer has gone up to $25,000. You have not signed the contract. You're still on $20,000, hypothetically. I don't know what the salary, but I'm giving you a hypothetical example, $20,000. Now $20,000 under the new system may be somebody who's not a senior administrative officer, but just an administrative officer. So you will then become an administrative officer. Because $20,000 is for those people who are administrative officers, not senior administrative officers. Jane will explain a lot more in that respect. Yes, I talked about the discipline and the reforms. It needs to be what we call also it's positive discipline. What is positive discipline? Positive discipline is the example that I have been using throughout has been, in Fiji at the moment there are a lot of teachers who double up as student counselors because we don't have enough professional student counselors. Very few people pursue counseling as a career path. So a lot of teachers double up as a student counselor. Now assuming that you're a teacher and you're a student counselor also at the same time. And there may be, for example, a complaint against you by a student or a teacher that you have not done the right thing as a student counselor. And there may be investigation. And they may actually find out you have not done the right thing. But they may also find out, that the reason why you did not do the right thing was because you don't have the right level of training. Therefore you did not do the right thing. You did not know what to do. So in your own judgment as a non-trained counselor, you took a particular decision. Now part of the disciplinary process could be, yes, he or she did not do the right thing. However, in order for us to correct it, he or she needs to go for a 3-month course or training. if he or she wants to continue as a counselor. That's what you call positive discipline. You need to be able to, many times a lot of the civil servants do not necessarily do the right thing, not just because they deliberately set out to do the wrong thing, or because they went out of their way to not do the right thing. They simply do not have the level of exposure, level of training. So you need to be able to have a system that identifies those things, and therefore is what you call positive discipline. Of course, there may be cases where you do need what we call negative discipline, because you may have actually put your hand in the till, or like we found some teachers raping little girls at the back of the room. I mean, these are some of the negative disciplines that needs to be meted out also. Principle of natural justice, as I mentioned to you, all investigation, decision making must be principle of natural justice. You must have given a right of response, etc. The allegations must be put to you. Improvements to supervision management we talked about. We need to improve communications. Having come from the private sector myself, I was quite appalled at the level or lack of communication between the HR department and the actual staff themselves. It was actually quite appalling. There is not a lot of professionalism. We need to obviously improve that level of professionalism that exists within the civil service. And of course, we've got training available. We'd also like to get your feedback too. We want to have, we'll give you some information further on about how you can get exposure to these sorts of trainings. We've got, this is the performance assessment that I talked about. Somebody said to us this morning, they said, oh, we've had PMS before and it failed. Yes, they did it. I think in the post-2000 they put in a PMS. I think that's the time when they changed the titles of permanent secretaries to CEOs, but the same people got hired. They just named it, changed the title. But this is being done professionally. That was not done very professionally. This is why it's taking a bit longer. We've got the World Bank working on it. Further consultation will be held in October and November. We need to have the guidelines by the end of 2017. You must also know what's the criteria of assessing you. It cannot be done in the dark. So you must know beforehand, when you will be assessed, what's the criteria? What are we looking at? For example, I know in the Solicitor General's office, when they have wrote out this criteria, they not only get assessed by the supervisors, they also get assessed by the subordinates. So if you have a principal legal officer, for example, the Deputy Solicitor General will assess you, but also the junior lawyers will assess you as to how you have performed too. And they know beforehand what's the criteria on which you will be assessed. Of course, sometimes it's not always individual, it can also be about the output of a particular department. And that's how the criteria will be rolled out. There will of course be a new, a lot of training that will be rolled out in respect of that. And of course, even once you are assessed, if you believe your assessment is not correct, you can appeal it. There again will be grounds of appeal if you believe your assessment is not correct. And what it does, ladies and gentlemen, it gives you the ability to move within the bands. Those of you who have been in the civil service for quite some time, a lot of the people in the civil service, once, for example, they got a particular position, their ability to get a pay rise was very limited unless you got a promotion, generally. So you may be in a particular ministry for 10 years, you've got all the knowledge, you've got all the skill sets. Say, for example, you're working in Ministry of Industry and Trade, and you've been there for 10 years, but now you want a pay rise. Your ability to retain that position and get a pay rise is very limited. So what you start doing, you start looking for positions in other ministries. And then you look for positions in other ministries, you may find say a vacancy in Ministry of Mangroves or something. So even though you may know nothing about mangroves, even though you've been here for 10 years, you'll apply for that position. And you may even get it. Just to get a pay rise, you've actually foregone this position which you probably like doing. You like that area, but just to get a pay rise, you've gone to the ministry. That's how people used to get the pay rise, people. People still do it. And this is why people in Fiji, in the civil service, are very much driven by titles. We like titles. Because titles means you're going to get a pay rise. Titles means you have some kind of authority over other people. So the focus was not on the terms and conditions, but more on the titles. We're trying to get you to not think about titles. We're trying to get you to think about the level of responsibility you have, and you'll get rewarded accordingly. I'll give you an example. If you go to a bank, You might find a teller. The teller may be there for 10, 15 years. If the teller makes a mistake, maybe $5 out here and there. At the same time, you have other people working in the bank, maybe 3, 4, 5 years out of university, but they have a different level of training. They deal, for example, in foreign exchange. They trade in foreign currency. They sit in a closed room and they do deals. If they make one mistake, the bank can lose $500,000, can lose $200,000. That person in that room gets paid a higher salary than this person who works as a teller. Why? Because the level of risk is different. In the same way we have nurses. Some nurses, because they're categorized as senior nurses, but some of the senior nurses were doing very risky kind of surgeries and procedures. They're doing the angiogram, stenting and what have you. But they were being paid the same salary as other nurses maybe working. There was no level of differentiation between the risks involved. The other example I want to also give you is that 2007, when I went to the Ministry of Justice, I went around and spoke to everybody, and I asked them, I said, what do you do, and what, all of you did, and all of that. So there's one person, I said, what's your level, what do you do? He said, my job is to look after all the vehicles in the Ministry of Justice. I said, okay. How many vehicles in the Ministry of Justice? 1. That was the entire vehicle fleet at that point in time in the Ministry of Justice. But there was this position, so they filled it. So this person's job was to just look after the vehicle, or one vehicle, and he's being paid a yearly salary. Wasn't that much, he wasn't being paid $50,000. But the fact of the matter is that in the private sector, that level of responsibility was actually given to the personal assistant or the secretary. Her job was to make sure the vehicle was servicing on time. In the same way, there are various positions within the civil service where one person can do a lot more job, a lot more skills. Multitasking. You can do a bit more multitasking, but be paid a higher salary. We have a very kind of narrow way of viewing employment. Modern employment is very different. You can multitask but get a higher salary. It's good for the employer, it's good for you, it's good for your career path too. So those are the kind of things we're actually looking at with these reforms. That's it, I think. Sorry? Okay. Now, job evaluation background, we had approved the guidelines and released in January 2017, and Jane will go a lot into detail. It's position-based pay, so the person and the position are considered separately. Okay, this is what I was trying to highlight before. The person and the position are considered separately. The jobs are evaluated, not people. So it's the position that's evaluated, not the person. Now, bands are therefore determined by the requirements of the job. And Jane will give more details. You've been given certain handouts about the bands. You'll also see within the band, there's greater scope. So when you have a performance assessment system, you have the ability to be actually getting a pay rise at times even on a yearly basis or every month or even every 2 years. The way the old civil service structure worked was every 5 years or 7 years you get this big negotiation, then somebody says, oh, 5% pay rise, 3% pay rise, 7% pay rise. That's how it used to happen. We want you to be able to get that pay rise based on your performance on a much more frequent basis, on a regular basis. And of course, these things may change, but the market may change. The market changing, you could even get a greater assessment in respect of the evaluation of the exercise itself. So what we've done now, we've tried to fix up the base. This is what we call the base. We'll get the base done. And then you have your individual performances. Maybe after 4 years, we'll re-look at the base, do another evaluation. In India, for example, every 10 years, they look at the civil service pay. They look at the base. We obviously want to be able to do it sooner than every 10 years. In the meantime, apart from the base itself, your individual assessments will be done on a more regular basis, so you can move within your band on a much regular basis. So the qualification requirements are only one factor considered in evaluation. Let me give you an example. You know, there seemed to be a trend at one stage among southern civil servants to go off and get an MBA at USB and various other. Now, the MBA may not be necessarily a job requirement. It's something you just want to do. Just because you've gone and done an MBA, so for example, this lady and I, we work in the same position, same area. Just because I've gone and done an MBA does not mean I should get paid a higher salary. Because it's not required for the position. It's not required for the position. And even though I may be an MBA, she may be a much better performer than me. So this is the point of difference. Like we've had, for example, the argument of the school teachers. To be a primary school teacher, you need to have a diploma. So there are certain teachers who are saying, look, I've got a degree, or I've got an MBA, therefore I should be paid more than them. No. It depends on the performance. The requirement for the job is a diploma. In the same way, you have a lawyer. The requirement for you to practice as a lawyer, you need to do an LLB, you need to do a PDLB, the Legal Practitioner's Course, and you get admitted to the High Court. Just because I've gone and done a master's does not mean I should get a higher salary than the lawyer who's starting off with me. That's something I've done additional. Yes, there may be another position that may require somebody to have an MBA, require the person to have a master's. That's one factor. So please understand that. We have to, of course, assess that the people who are doing the job are competent, and there are sufficient people to undertake the volume of work. We need to ensure that that also happens. Next one, please. Okay, one of the things we've done for you is to show you the pay rise that you've got is not simply the pay rise you've got that means you're taking more money in your pocket. Because we've increased the income tax threshold, every single person in Fiji has got a tax cut. Okay, so even if you're earning more than $30,000, you also have got a tax cut. It's just that the people who earn less than $30,000 don't pay any tax at all now. But people who earn more than $30,000 who have also got a tax cut, because the way the tax system works is this. When you increase the income tax threshold, the person who pays tax after the threshold also has to have a reduced tax. And I'll show you how. So, they've got this. Okay. So, for example, let's take a person, say, who is a senior surveyor. A person who is a senior surveyor, before the job evaluation exercise, was getting paid $31,000. Okay. Now, so the tax they paid on that was $2,000. The take-home pay was $29,000. Okay. Now that surveyor, their salary has jumped up from $31,000 to $43,000 after the job evaluation exercise. Which surveyors are very hard to find, etc. So they've got a fairly big pay rise. I don't know what percentage that is, James. Is that one? It's a 38% pay rise they've received, a surveyor. They jumped from $31,000 to $43,000. Now, if the income tax threshold remained at $16,000, they'll pay $4,000 tax. After tax, they take home $39,000. So the increase in pay, take home, I'm not talking about it's after tax, the increase in pay is $9,800. But, ladies and gentlemen, because now we've increased the income tax threshold to $30,000 and everybody else has got a tax cut, so the pay now is $43,000. They don't pay $4,200 tax, they actually pay $2,300 tax. So in fact, the take-home pay after tax is $11,000. So that's how significant the pay rises have been if you take into account the new income tax threshold that we've put in place. So if, for example, you were somebody who previously used to earn $17,000, you now get paid $20,000, increase is $2,440, but because you no longer pay any taxes, your take-home pay is $2,700. If you, for example, let me take somebody else. Again, $24,000, if you are a nurse team leader, band G, $24,000 used to get before. Now you get $28,000. Net effect is $3,100. However, because you've got a tax cut, you now take $4,700 more. You no longer pay any tax. So the other point also, ladies and gentlemen, that I wanted to highlight is that, which I've completely forgotten now. It escaped my mind. It was a very, very important point that I wanted to make, but it just escaped me. So that's the level. This slide here goes to show you the difference between that and this, and what is your take-home pay. Okay? There's something really important I want to tell you, but I've forgotten. I've got too many things in my head at the moment. So kind of space is running out. So next, is that it? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Jane Curran came to Fiji when we were setting up the Fijian Elections Office. As you know, before, the Elections Office, what was then called the Supervisor of Elections Office, used to be done on an ad hoc basis. So whenever there was elections, just before elections, they used to pull people from different ministries, set up the office, run the elections, and then after elections, the office was kind of emasculated. It went away, and then you waited another 5 years or whatever it was. But to run an internationally accredited elections office, you have to have permanent staff. So in order to set up the entire HR system, Jane Curran came to us courtesy of the Australian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they gave her to us on aid. And then Jane was so good, we decided to use her for the civil service reforms. And she's been an enormous amount of help for us. So Jane, ladies and gentlemen, will now take you through the other aspects of the reform. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. So I'll just talk a little bit about the relationships between the guidelines that the Minister mentioned at the start. Because people often get confused. They think, job evaluation is going to be how I move through the bands, the steps, or this guideline, is that how I get selected for the job? So this slide is just to give you an overview of how the guidelines fit together. So job evaluation is the process that we use to determine the level of the job, so the band of the job, and therefore the salary that goes with the job. That's job evaluation. And that's about the duties and the responsibilities of the job and nothing to do with the person who's sitting in the job. Okay. OMRS, the Open Merit Recruitment and Selection, determines who is appointed to the position. So it's open merit that is how you get the job. Okay, so that's how, they're the rules around how positions are advertised and what assessment is undertaken to decide who goes into the job. Then once you're in the job, discipline is used to make sure that everybody does the job the way we want them to. So it's about saying good supervision and management, making sure that people understand what's required of them, and taking action if they're not doing what's required of them, either through performance or conduct. That's discipline. And then the last one is performance management. Performance management includes the assessment that then determines whether you move on to a higher step within the band that your position has been assigned to. So that's how the different guidelines come together into the package that covers your terms and conditions. So job evaluation. It's taken us a while. It's actually been about 6 months. The guideline came out in January, but we first started training job evaluators in April. And some of you will be trained evaluators. I recognise some people from the job evaluation training. We trained 200 people to be our job evaluators, and we plan to train some more in November or December so that we keep a good pool of people who are able to evaluate jobs, because it's important to understand that we don't intend job evaluation to be a one-off exercise. We expect that there will be ongoing evaluations as jobs change, as organisations change their structure and new jobs are created. We have to have people available who can evaluate those jobs. So there'll be ongoing accreditation for people who are evaluating the jobs. The results of the job evaluation reflect the quality of the information that was provided. Committees could only work on what they were given. And some of the job documentation that came in from various ministries could have been better. People perhaps didn't understand what would happen with the documentation that they were writing up. Those job evaluation questionnaires that lots and lots of people wrote, because you can't see the floor in Bernie's office, it's still covered with job evaluation questionnaires. But the quality of the information made it very difficult for the committees to fully understand the job, so we had to go back and get more information. And with the limited time, because we had a timetable and we really did want to make sure that we rolled out at the time that we said we would, we could only operate with what we've got. So, for example, some of the job descriptions or job evaluation questionnaires that came in when we were moderating, so the job evaluation leadership team who moderates the work of the committees, when we were moderating, we would pull out the job documentation and have a look, because we might have 10 different committees who've evaluated 10 different batches of the same job. So we have a look at position X, and it says that it reports to position Y. So we go, oh good, well we'll pull out position Y so that we make sure that we get the relationship between them right. But position Y says that position X reports to position A. Okay, so they didn't match. So it was quite difficult to put the picture together. And where we could, we went back to ministries and checked. But there are thousands of different jobs. It is also the case in a transition like this that we evaluate nurses. We evaluate registered nurses. Now we know we've got hundreds of different job descriptions and there are differences. But when I go through the job evaluation factors, you'll see that although there are differences, they will come out at the same level. Okay. There may be jobs out there that are different to the rest of the group, and there is a process for re-evaluation if necessary. Okay. So the other problem that we had with job evaluation was late submission of documents. So we had asked for all of the questionnaires to come in at least a month before the committees needed them, but for a lot of jobs we were still chasing them even when the committees had started meeting. So that also slowed down the process a little bit. So other issues around job evaluation, the top bit is about inaccurate information in that the rumour mill is circulating, okay, or social media is circulating. So we want to make sure that we correct some of this afternoon. There have been no salary decreases. No one has been offered a contract where the salary would be less than what they were receiving before. All of the payroll records that I've seen show that everyone is getting an increase. As the Minister said, it might mean that you have to do different duties. Okay? There may be some redistribution of work, but everyone is being offered an increase. Anyone who has been given something that looks like it's a decrease, you need to check it with your HR because it will not be right. Okay? There's obviously something that's gone wrong, and that is possible when we're dealing with this volume. So the first step is to check it with your HR. If you're still not satisfied, we have the email address at the end of the presentation, and you can email us and we will check it as well for you. If you don't think that your position has gone onto the right band, there is a process in the guideline to request a review. It's a legitimate avenue. There is no problem with you requesting a review. It does go to your permanent secretary. You do need to show that something is different in your job to the documentation that was originally submitted. Because if we review the same documentation, it should come out the same. So something has to be different. You have to say, well, my job's not like that. Okay? Because they were batched. Okay, if we've got hundreds of jobs with the same title and basically the same duties, then they would have all been evaluated together. So if you think that your job is different, there is a process for review. We did have a couple of reviews requested in Tranche 1 and they've already been completed. There are a couple of requests for review from Tranche 2 that are still sitting on my desk because we've been working on Tranche 3. Tranche 3, the results were forwarded out to permanent secretaries last night. So now we can go back and start looking at any of those outstanding reviews. There's no time limit. It's really up to you, but the contract acceptance date determines the date that you start to get paid. But there's nothing to stop you accepting the current contract and then asking for a review. The start date for contracts is the first pay that commences in the month that the contract is signed. So it's not the first of the month, it's the first pay in the month. Okay? And that's because with people signing contracts at all different dates, it's the most consistent way that we can actually write it up at a policy level. Okay, so people who signed in August, it was the 13th of August. September, it's the 10th of September. If it rolls over into October, it's the 8th of October. So how did we get to, you've all got a copy of the bands, how did we actually get jobs onto the bands? I mentioned that we trained evaluators. They are internationally accredited. The methodology that we use is called SP10 because there are 10 factors and the company is based in New Zealand. Okay. So they came from New Zealand and they trained our 200 evaluators across 3 different programs, and those people are internationally accredited as job evaluators. And they use these 10 factors to determine the overall score that attaches to the job that then puts it onto the band. So the first one is education. These factors have different weightings. There's a lot of research and science behind the different weightings. I'm not going to go into how they determine or what the actual weighting is. If you want to know, nominate to be a job evaluator and we'll train you and give you more information. So education. Education is about what's required for the job, not what the job holder currently has. Now, a lot of the job descriptions that came in, we could tell it was what the person actually had because we looked at 5 different jobs and they had 5 different qualifications, but they were actually the same job. So we had to go back and check some of that information. So the qualification is about what is actually required in order to do the job, which may or may not be the old MQR. In some jobs it is, and in some jobs it isn't. If the person, as the Minister mentioned, if the person who's sitting in the job holds a higher qualification than that is required for the job, it doesn't affect the band because, of course, the job evaluation is about the position, not about the person. But when we bring in performance assessment, we would like to think that the person who has the higher qualification will perform better. But we can't assume that, so we're not going to pay them for the qualification, we're going to assess their performance. Okay. So the second one is experience, and again, it's the experience that's required for the job. How long does it take to learn how to do this particular job? So some jobs, if you're a receptionist, it might take 6 months to be fully competent and be able to be left alone on the reception desk and be able to do that job. Other jobs, it might take 10 or 15 years to learn. So you work your way up through other jobs in order to get the knowledge that you need in order to be able to do a particular job. So obviously there are different scores attached for that different level of experience. Complexity is about how predictable the job is. So complexity means, when I come to work in the morning, do I do the same thing every day? Do I know what to expect every day when I come to work? Or when I come to work, is it a new and exciting adventure every time I walk through the door because I have no idea what's going to happen during that day? Different levels of predictability in the job. Scope. is directly linked to education and experience, and it's about how much control you have over staff and resources. So the higher education and experience you need in a job, normally the more control you have over what you do. Problem solving is how much judgment do you need to make. Again, it's linked. These criteria link together. In fact, the spreadsheet that we use when we do the evaluations has automatic programming in it that tells us if they don't match. It comes up with a message out on the right-hand side that says, normally for this level of education and experience, you have a higher level of problem solving, or sometimes a lower level of problem solving. So problem solving is about how much judgment do you need to apply? How many rules are there that govern the work that you do? Is your job fully covered by rules? Do you always know what you have to do, or do you have to apply a lot more judgment, a lot more thinking about or interpreting in order to make the decisions required in your job? Freedom to act, again, is directly linked to problem solving. Okay? So are you allowed to make the decisions yourself, or do you have to go to someone else? So what sorts of problems do you have to refer to someone higher up in the organisation? And this is where, in a lot of the job documentation that people sent in, they pretty much said that they made no decisions. But then when we went back and checked with some of the ministries, it's like, no, that's not really accurate, because they said that they would escalate all problems up, which would indicate a very low freedom to act, but it didn't match with the type of qualifications and experience they were saying was needed for the job. So a lot of those factors had to be checked as we were trying to finish off the evaluations. The impact of decisions, as the Minister mentioned, we assume that people are competent for the roles that they do. So we don't evaluate based on what could go wrong when you're in the job. We evaluate assuming that you will get it right, and then we look at, well, if you get that decision right, what is the impact on the organisation? Can you improve the reputation of the organisation? Can you make money for the organisation? Okay, so what impact does your decision have? Your interpersonal skills is about who you talk to in your job. Is it just with your immediate team, or is it with people outside the organisation, and in what capacity? Are you representing the organisation, or are you just taking phone calls and fielding them onto somebody else? Are you negotiating with them, or are you persuading them to another point of view? So there are different levels in terms of not only who you talk to, but the type of communication that you have with people. Authority is about the formal authority of the position to spend money and to hire or fire staff. Now in the civil service, most of that is with the permanent secretary, but some positions do have delegations, or some positions manage a budget but they can't actually sign off on the expenditure. So there's different scores depending on the level of authority. And the last one is people management. It's about how many staff report to a particular position. So the bigger the staff numbers, the higher the score, because the more complex, it all links back, the more complex the job is. Anyone who's a supervisor knows, as soon as you've got staff, the complexity in your job goes up, because managing other people and getting other people to do work is actually a lot harder than doing it yourself. So that's the factors that are used. They each have a different score. You end up with a result. And then the position goes on to the bands. The bands themselves were developed quite separately. So if you think about the job evaluations as being one side of the coin, developing the bands themselves is the other side of the coin. So the bands themselves, there are 15 broad bands, and you have a copy, because I couldn't put it on a slide, it doesn't show up. A is at the bottom and O is at the top. All of the positions now fit onto the bands, and with Tranche 3 coming out yesterday, effectively all of the old occupational scales, so the 31 different scales plus the 29 that were in education, will all go, and all jobs fit onto the bands. The bands are benchmarked to the private sector. Now this has been talked about a lot. I know we've had ministerial statements in Parliament and press statements, but what does that mean when we say that they're benchmarked to the private sector? It means the midpoint, step 4, is benchmarked or matched to the private sector. So to do that, we had a number of studies. We had the World Bank come in and do a benchmark compensation study. They collected a sample of jobs. They went from the public sector, they went to the private sector and said, do you have comparable jobs? Tell us what you pay for these jobs. So that was the first study. The second study we had was specifically for teachers and nurses, because there's not much of a private sector for those jobs in Fiji. And we asked the World Bank to do a study and tell us not what teachers and nurses actually got paid in other countries, but to tell us what occupations got paid the same as them in other countries, so that we knew what occupations we would expect to be lining them up against when we did the job evaluation here. And then when we partnered, we tendered and we selected SP10 as the methodology. They partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers, who do the annual salary survey in Fiji, and they use the same methodology that we've used. So we actually know how much someone at Band H in another organisation, they don't call it Band H, they're our bands, they might call it something else, but we know a job with that number of points, we know what it gets paid in the private sector. So those three reports told us what the midpoint should be. That's step 4. So step 4, and that's why it's bolded on the sheet, because it's a very important part of the way the salary bands are constructed. The first issue that we found when we started to look, though, was that the World Bank in the Compensation Benchmark Survey recommended that the government benchmark to 75% of the private sector. There's a whole range of reasons around that from their worldwide research. But when we started to look at particularly Band A and B, we already pay more than that compared to the private sector. So we're already on 90 to 100% of the private sector at those bands. So the midpoints are actually a sliding scale. At the bottom of the bands, we're about 110% of the private sector, and at the top, we're about 60% of the private sector. And in the middle, so bands F, G, H, that sort of range, we're around 100% of the private sector. And on average, so across all of the bands, we've gone up to 94%. So can you have a look at the private sector and say, I'm a Band H, I'll find a Band H job in the private sector and they'll get paid exactly that? No, it doesn't quite work that way because it's an average, okay? But that is what the benchmarking means, okay? And it's on that step 4. So step 4 is also called the Competence Step. When performance assessment comes in, anyone whose assessment puts them at a range where they're fully competent and achieving all of the requirements of their job should expect to be moving to step 4. The bands are also not intended for people to just start on step 1. Anyone coming into the service can start on step 1, 2 or 3, but not 4. So step 1, 2 and 3 are for people who are developing into the roles. So steps 1, 2 and 3 are for those who are developing into the roles. Step 4 is for people who are fully performing the requirements of the role. And steps 5, 6 and 7 are for people who are doing more than the requirements of the role. So that's for, as the Minister mentioned, our high flyers. Okay? And that will come in once performance assessment, once the guideline is finished, the criteria will come out, so that you'll see on what basis will you be assessed as to whether you're fully performing the full requirements of the job. So increments are not time-based. So moving through the steps is not about time, it's about performance. The only link to time is how often we'll be doing the assessment. So new people coming in, the step is determined based on how well they met the selection criteria, the knowledge, experience, skills and abilities, in the selection process, because the logic is that the higher the score in that process, the more likely you are to be able to come in with minimal training into that job. So if you've got a really high score in your assessment, you'll go into step 3, and then after probation, most likely you'll move to step 4. Okay. Sorry, there's a slide missing. Oop, there is. Okay, so the steps in transition, when people moved across onto the salary bands, because we don't have performance data, everyone has moved onto the step for the band of their position where they've received the maximum increase of up to 15%. So depending on what you were paid before, you move on to the step in the new band where you receive an increase of up to the maximum of 15%. So for positions where the increase was more than 15%, people are offered a contract at a lower band where they will still receive an increase of up to 15%, and then they can either act and while they're acting, the position would be advertised. In some ministries, the acting is automatic, so health and education, to minimise disruption to schools and to hospital services, the acting was automatic, but in other positions, people actually moved out of their jobs. There should have been an expression of interest and people are able to act while the position is advertised. So the snapshot that you've got, so the one that looks like the 3-page one, sort of the little snapshot, we couldn't fit all of the jobs onto a handout. It's a book. Okay, we have all of the jobs, we actually have a report and the book's this big, so we didn't want to kill that many trees, so we just did a selection. But ministries have the full list of the jobs. So in the snapshot, the left-hand columns show the actual increase for the position, and if it's above 15% in the increase column, then there'll be entries in the right-hand column to show what band the contract should have been issued at if the increase was more than 15%. So those, for anyone who's in a job that's affected where the increase is more than 15%, that contract is your safety net. So that's where you would go, or where you would be redeployed to, that level, if you didn't get the position after it was advertised on open merit. So it's confirmation for you that even though the job's being advertised, you definitely still have a job. It's your safety net. And it's not saying that you won't get the job, it's saying that you're safe if you don't. Okay. So that's all on the job evaluation. This is a little bit more about the general reforms. There's a lot of other activity that's going on in ministries and across the civil service. So the Minister mentioned about multi-skilling and changing jobs. This is business process improvement. So we have one technical advisor who's working with ministries to train staff on how to map processes, identify problems, and improve those processes. And that's about making the work more interesting. It's also about making sure that we're providing better service wherever possible. It is also part of the Permanent Secretary's own performance assessment. So their performance assessment is done by the Public Service Commission, and one of the requirements in their performance is that they have actually made improvements to processes during the year, and they have to be able to demonstrate that. So they're getting actively involved in trying to improve the processes. The World Bank has been doing institutional reviews across most ministries. They're largely complete. There's only industry and trade and education still to go. Everyone else has got their report. Most ministries have started to implement the recommendations. Most of the recommendations are around improvements to business processes and changes to structures. Some ministries are asking for additional help to implement those changes. So like health, for example, has asked for help with their restructure. Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, they've asked for help with their restructure, but Agriculture have said that they're fine and they're happy to do it with their internal resources. If you want to know about what's happening at your individual ministry level, if your ministry hasn't told you, then you need to be talking to your supervisors and be trying to get that information to come down. It's not possible to cover every ministry at a session like this one. So I mentioned, in education there's a review of their structure coming up. We've already worked with them to review their HR structure, and there's some staffing ratio studies happening as well. And in health, there's a specific review of the medical superintendent and the hospital manager roles, as well as an implementation for the HR management information system. So it already exists in the ministry, but it's not fully implemented. So there are a couple of key activities that are happening in those ministries. Every ministry has other activities that are going on in their ministry. So if you need more information, or if you want more information, if we've got some interest, the unit regularly conducts information sessions. We have information officers. Most of them were doing the registration when you came in this afternoon. They're available to come to ministries. We just take bookings for them, and they come out at a time that's suitable to actually talk with you more specifically in your own ministry, to keep you up to date with changes that are happening. You can request through your permanent secretary to us, or you can email us on the inquiries email at the bottom, and we'll go back through your permanent secretary to organise. You can also nominate to attend training. So the Minister mentioned some of the training activities that are happening. So the Civil Service Reform Management Unit, we don't belong to the Ministry of Civil Service. We actually sit with the Ministry of Economy, but we work quite closely with the Ministry of Civil Service. They have their own training unit, and they run training on CV writing and job interview skills, which there's lots of jobs being advertised. I would encourage everyone to try and attend that training. It would help you in the process with lots of jobs starting to be advertised. Through the unit, we run discipline training. So we mentioned that there's big changes in the way discipline is supposed to be managed, and that training is particularly focused on looking at better ways of being a supervisor or a manager. So we'd encourage you to nominate and come and do that training, or the investigation officer training as well. So, back to the boss.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you can see the email address that's there. Please take that down. If you have any further queries, if you have any individual issue that you want to raise yourself after this, you're most welcome to do that. And please also understand that that email is not accessed by everybody, only a handful of us, 2 or 3 of us only, so we can be assured of the privacy that you may require. I'd like to now open up the floor for any questions you may have, and then